When should you give up on a book? Readers weigh in. Like a lot of great ideas, Nancy Pearl's Rule of 50 arrived in a flash. The librarian and best-selling author was fielding questions on a public radio show when a woman called in and explained she wasn't enjoying the book she was reading but felt guilty about abandoning it. And then it just came to me, Pearl says over the phone from her home in the Pacific Northwest. I said, give the book 50 pages, and if at the bottom of page 50 all you care about is who the murderer is or who marries whom, turn to the last page and then stop reading. The directive earned an addendum years later when Pearl realized that the older she got, the more precious time became, so readers over 50 can instead subtract their age from 100 to determine the number of pages they must endure. The great thing about that, Pearl says with a laugh, is that when you turn 100, you can legitimately judge a book by its cover. Pearl, who included the Rule of 50 in her 2003 guide, Book Lust, didn't realize what she was setting in motion. Some readers take the protocol very seriously. They act like it was Moses and the Ten Commandments, she says, and the reach of the rule no doubt multiplied when it was selected as part of Starbucks' quote on a cup campaign. But not everyone follows the rule, including Pearl herself. Whenever I get bored or annoyed by an authorial tick, I immediately stop, she admits, and there are plenty of people who believe that bailing that bailing on a book is a crime against literature. In short, there are many ways to finish or not finish a book. That was the upshot when we asked readers of our book club newsletter about their own habits. Many of the more than 600 respondents told us that life is too short to spend on a lackluster book, and many of those people reference Nancy's rule. But there is also a forceful minority who bail on books less as they age, if they ever did in the first place. Here are some of the lessons we learned from our readers. The decision to abandon a book is reversible. According to Pearl, at a minimum, 80% of why we like or don't like a book depends on our mood. She should know. She tried to read George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones twice, only to set it aside, but on the third attempt, the pages she had once dismissed had a completely different impact on her. She started the book during a flight to a workshop, and by the time the plane landed, she wanted to skip the workshop so she could finish the book. Our own readers had similar tales. Eileen McGorry of Olympia, Washington, recently read Let the Great World Spin by Colum McCann, a book she had tried and failed to read 3 times before. I picked it up once again after one more recommendation from a friend and consumed it in 3 days, she writes. This example and others like it prove to me that I have probably never put down a book for good. When you know, you know. Some people can discern within a sentence or two whether a book is going to be a keeper. I once read that an author had better hook the reader in the first 3 lines, and that's what I adhere to, writes Robin Russell of Fairbanks, Alaska. 10 pages tops is what I give them. When Rebecca Summerlot of Windermere, Florida was young, her mother encouraged her to give a book 20 pages. Now I can bail out without remorse at any point, she writes. I've quit a book mid-sentence when it's not working for me. When you know, sometimes you don't really know. And yet, have you ever felt your attention waiting only to unexpectedly find that the story has gotten its hooks in you? That's what happened to Bruce Oram of New York. He usually gives books about 25 pages, but it's not a hard and fast rule, which is sometimes a good thing. I believe I gave her Hernan Diaz's Trust just 5 extra pages, and then bam, I read it 2 times in a row, he writes. Margaret Herrera of Pleasanton, California, usually gives books 1 chapter unless she's been warned that a great book has a slow start. The Shipping News by Annie Prolux was a book I detested until I finished with such a sense of awe for the writer and her mastery at character transformation, she writes. The pandemic changed reading habits for some. A number of respondents mentioned that they're more likely to abandon a book since 2020, which isn't entirely surprising. As Peggy Rose of Sebastopol, California writes, the pandemic gave me permission to really care about what I really care about. Reading samples can help cut down on abandonment. Some readers swear that the trick to picking a winning book is conducting tryouts. Bernie and Mazzotti of Wildwood, Missouri likes to read a few pages while she's in a bookstore to get a feel for the story before making a purchase. Others take advantage of the free samples they can get on their Kindles. Starting with a sample means I have to actually perform an action to get the rest of the book writes Rhonda Chase of Pleasanton, California. When I finish my sample, the cost and effort either feels worth it or it doesn't. You're not imagining it. It's easier than ever to bail. The evolution of Whit Andrews' book procurement says it all. When you're in the back of a Dodge Dart and the nearest library for which you have a car is an hour away, you can tolerate a bad book a lot more than when you're holding a piece of silicon e-ink and a decent book is less than $5 away. There's so much competing for our attention these days, including so many other books. A number of readers mentioned the easy access to ebooks and audiobooks on the Libby app tied to their library card. If you do bail, there's sense in feeling guilty about it. There's no sense in feeling guilty about it. Bookstore owners do it, librarians do it, even English teachers do it. I've even bailed on books I was having students read in classrooms if I didn't feel strongly about the novel and the kids were sufficiently hostile, writes Cynthia G. Bazinet, a retired English teacher in Nova Scotia. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do for everyone's sanity. Personally for me, I always, since the beginning of time, always like to read books from cover to cover. That's just me. I think it's a great challenge to force yourself to read a book, even if it's not interesting. I've just always been that way. But that's my little tidbit at the end. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.